there's a magic that happens when you're responsible for somebody learning something for the first time, and that results in tremendous feelings of self-esteem.
It's wonderful for everybody involved. I mean, here we have our own students teaching our younger students, and it's a role model to look up to.
So I think, if we're creative, we can find ways to tap into the ways that students can show us their best learning.
Students bring diverse and interesting stories with them, and my teaching methods allow a space for them to have voice and to improve and deepen the education of everybody in the room.
One more thing that really moved me about it was the way the students really came together.
This year, Mr. DeCosta's class got creative when making their history projects. 2 students decided to use their fashion and sewing skills to create something historical and unique. Emily and Alicia studied Harriet Tubman, who was an abolitionist and political activist in the late 1800s. She made around 13 missions to rescue about 70 slaves.
Emily and I have been in the fashion industry here at Ward for a few years now, and making this dress was a great way to connect both fashion and history. Harriet Tubman made a really big impact in history, and she taught a lot of lessons and inspired a lot of people, helped a lot of people, and showed that a lot of things are possible.
So basically, she wasn't in many photos, so the one photo she was like fully in, she was wearing this dress, that's why we made it. It took us about 20 hours over the course of 3 to 4 weeks.
These 2 students worked hard for many weeks to bring this creation to life. In the process, they learned more about Harriet Tubman and how important she was in American history.
So we hand sewed each one of these buttons on, and then we made the shawl separately, and then connected it to the neckline. And then in the picture, she has 3 seams at the bottom of her dress, and that's what we recreated. The first seam, second seam, and then the bottom seam. And yeah, we made our own pattern, and we created our own dress.
Overall, the girls were able to learn more about the importance of Harriet Tubman while also creating a beautiful replica to remember her.
Hi, my name is Laurie DeGrode, and I'm the fashion teacher here at Fairfield Ward High School. Emily and Alicia actually made this dress with not a lot of help from myself because they already were taking this class and learned many of their skills. One of the advanced skills that they learned was creating buttonholes and learning how to pattern out the placement of the buttonholes and sewing the buttonholes. Okay. My overall feeling is that they did a good job and they really worked independently to show their skills and worked well together. I would say that some of the other things I was proud of what they worked on was creating their own pattern. They did not use an existing pattern. They created their own pattern for the whole garment, the top including the bottom.
I'm Nathaniel Taft, and I did my research project on a trivia game about the transatlantic slave trade. I chose my topic because I thought it was a very interesting idea which connects deeply to American history. I also wanted to learn more about the topic as well as teach others about it as well. So in this game, it's based on Trivial Pursuit, a game where a number of players go around a board rolling a dice and taking a question on whatever the topic they land on the board is. The first player to get all of the questions in each category correct wins the game. This game took me upwards of 20 hours to make, from the research to the design of the box to making the cards. The best part of the project was the graphic design elements. It's not incredibly complicated, but I like graphic design a lot, so it was interesting to add that to the project as well.
What's your name?
My name's Jade.
And what do you have right here?
This is a painting of the Salem witch trials that I made for history class.
Well, what was your inspiration for making it?
I really didn't know a lot about the Salem witch trials, but it's a very popular topic, and I wanted to research some of the misconceptions.
What's your favorite part about it?
I kind of like this little area I have here because it's different, it contrasts from the other parts of the painting.
How long did it take you to make the painting?
Days. I think in total maybe 20 to 30 hours-ish.
Do you take any art classes here at Ward?
Not anymore, no.
Did you take any?
Yeah, in freshman year I took 2D and 3D.
Alright y'all, so our first course is the Cole Cannon, as you can see here. So the ingredients for the Cole Cannon, we got our 4 potatoes, fresh potatoes. We got our nice freshly warm cup of milk. We got our pure ground black pepper. We just chopped some scallions. And last ingredient is the cabbage. It's a process right now. We're gonna put it in the sink over there. Get some water in it so then we could shred it. Here's Colin Fry peeling the sweet potatoes. All right, we got Colin right here putting the potatoes in. And some of the cabbage. We got it to a nice little boil right now, as you can see, the boiling pot. All right. So right now, I got the butter in a cup. I'm gonna heat the butter in this pan right here, you know what I'm saying? And once this butter, gets around the pan and gets heated up, as you can see here, we got the cabbage in there. I'm gonna get the cabbage out when my alarm goes off. It should be going off in a minute or so, and I'm gonna get it on here with the butter and the scallions. As you can see, I got the cabbage right there. I got the chopped scallions, and I got the butter that's just gonna simmer in this little pan, and then at 3:40 we're gonna be taking out the sweet potatoes. We got the sweet potatoes in here. It's nice and ready. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna safely, don't try this at home, kids. Take precaution. You want to safely carry this over to the strainer without burning yourself. You're gonna pour the water slowly
forwards, not towards yourself, into the strainer, because the water will go through it if you didn't know. Then the potatoes will slowly go in. Alright, this is why I want to do it carefully. Very carefully, you don't want to get burned. We'll slowly get the potatoes in the strainer. Piece of cake, guys. It really is. Now, you're going to put this on the non-hot stove. Not the hot stove that it was just the non-hot stove. High IQ, right?
These mashed potatoes, these sweet potatoes are looking gorgeous. I mean, just look at the perfect texture of it. And then right now we got our green scallions. Yeah, we got our green scallions, cabbage, You know what I'm saying? It's either Cole Cannon. Wow. Oh yeah, that's good. All right, y'all. So we're cooking our small course right now, which is soda bread, and we got our liquids right here, which is buttermilk and eggs mixed together. So creamy. And then we got our sugar over here, our baking soda over here, and I'm currently scooping our flour into this big bowl over here for the dry ingredients.
1 teaspoon of baking soda. We're sponsored by Arm & Hammer, and we also put in the sugar. So I'm gonna put in a teaspoon of baking soda right now.
All right, we just put the butter in, the dry ingredients. We're trying to work the butter in there. Yeah, Colin.
So buttery.
Work that butter.
Mushing it up, yo.
Our special guest is working the butter with his two bare hands.
Mushy. Pouring our buttermilk and egg mixture into our dry ingredients. So let's do that right now.
Where we will stir with a wooden spoon.
We'll mix it up.
Yeah, mix it with a wooden spoon. Oh yeah, mix it up, Colin. There's our nice little dough. Now Colin's working it with his hands. He's trying to get it a nice doughy texture so we can make it into soda bread.
Yeah.
Okay, so right now, we transfer the dough to a large, lightly greased baking sheet, and using our butter knife, we're going to score the top of the dough about 1.5 inches deep in an X shape. And the purpose of doing this method is it helps heat get into the center of the dough while it cooks.
Alright, y'all. We just put the soda bread in the oven. We're going to cook it for 35 to 45 minutes. Hopefully it tastes good.
Soda bread.
There's the Irish soda bread.
Oh.
Wow. Looks nice and crispy. By the way, if y'all are wondering, disclaimer, we did not use raisins because Colin is allergic.
Very allergic.
That's the final product.
Now we
wow. Alright, so right now, Colin is cutting the soda bread. Wow, that... Mwah. That just looks amazing.
It's a little hot. Give it a nice try.
Is it good? Bro, what the hell, Colin? Yup. This soda bread is really good. We just gave it a try. It's nice and moist in the middle, which is exactly what you're looking for.
Very nice.
Y'all, now we're about to make the apple cake. Alright, so Colin just creamed in the sugar and the butter. So we just added the in the vanilla extract, and we're about to add in 3 tablespoons of milk for the apple cake, which is one of our small things. So now we're adding in the milk, 3 tablespoons. Make sure you don't go over. Yeah, that's like 3 tablespoons. And then we got the Granny Smith apples. This is like the big ingredient to make it taste like an apple. We're gonna add in the eggs soon, the flour. It's gonna be great. See ya.
We just poured our wet ingredients into our dry ingredients.
We just chopped our apples into slices and we're putting it on top. Alright, we got the apples in the batter. Now we're gonna cook it for 60 to 70 minutes. Here's our final product, cut into the fourths. Nice and moist in the middle. Moist.
Now we will be making our corned beef.
Chop the onions. Colin's gonna put it in the pot. And we got our seasonings on the corned beef. Alright, we just got the carrots and onions in there in the pot. Into the bowl. Okay. We just threw the corned beef into the mix of the parsley, carrots, and onions. Now Colin's pouring the water in. Splash. All right, we'll be back once it's fully covered. It's fully covered. Now would you look at that? We're boiling it. It's been 30 minutes, so we're just flipping it. And Colin just did that, so every 30 minutes we're gonna flip it until it's ready.
Just let me know. All right, so we got our finished product of our corned beef here.
Oh yeah, how good does it look 1 through 10?
10.
Now we're making the Irish coffee. Splash. Coffee slowly going into the cup, and then we'll get the Irish whiskey.
1 tablespoon of brown sugar into our coffee.
Alright, we got the Irish whiskey in there. For legal purposes, we couldn't show the next part of the video.
Hey, don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Jack. Hey, don't you come back no more.
I'd have to say it's my boy Colin on the left. because basically I was going to do a reading project, and he really influenced me by saying some things to make me do it with him, the cooking project, and we turned out to have a blast.
Did you concentrate on immigration, military food, economic class differences, or something else?
Oh, we concentrated on immigration.
What were some of your surprises when you researched ingredients, cooking directions, and kitchen tools?
Well, we didn't find it that much of a surprise because at Colin's house where we worked, he already had some of the basic measuring tools, the teaspoons, tablespoons, all that. And we didn't really need anything too fancy to make our food.
What were some fun experiences?
Making the video, we had a lot of fun, put in funny clips, so it was very entertaining.
What were some of the things you learned about the group you researched, dishes you made, and about cooking?
Well, I learned about how Irish immigrants were very poor, and that it caused for stuff like corned beef to be made because it's very cheap. So, yeah.
Hi, this is Matt Anderson, and I chose to study Hungarian immigration to America for my second term research project. The first dish I'm making is cucumber salad. For this, you need 2 cucumbers, salt, white vinegar, an onion, and dill leaves. So to start, I'm using a vegetable peeler to peel the skin off of some cucumbers, and I put the peels in the waste bowl that all the parts that I don't need are going in. Next up, I'm thinly slicing the cucumbers on a mandolin, and they're going into a strainer bowl. After these cucumbers are cut, they get saran wrap put over them, and a weighted bowl, usually weighted with water, put over them, and in the sink to drain out as much moisture from the cucumbers as possible. At this point, I am thinly slicing an onion. Now I put the onion in a bowl, fill it with cold water, and I mix it up in there and swish it around in the water. Then I drain it and just let the onions sit there for a while. At this point, I am cutting up dill with a vegetable cleaver and just finely chopping it up, and that will be added to the salad with the onions and the cucumbers. Now to make the dressing for the salad, I put white vinegar in a bowl along with paprika, sugar, and freshly ground pepper, and I mix it all together. This is the final product of the cucumber salad. I mixed everything together and let it sit overnight and ate it the following afternoon with dinner. Hungarian immigration to America started in the middle of the 19th century. In 1848, there was a revolution in Hungary for their freedom from Austria. When the Hungarians lost, they started to sail over to the United States. This was the first wave of Hungarian immigration. After the first wave of Hungarian immigration, there were about 3,000 Hungarians in America, most of them being wealthier and more educated. They settled in cities like New York, Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland. The next dish I made was chicken paprikash. For this, I needed 2 onions, garlic, chicken stock, chicken, cornstarch, noodles, sea salt, cayenne pepper, paprika, oil, and pepper. First off, I am drying chicken in a paper towel, and then I will be seasoning it with salt and pepper on both sides. After this, I heat up some oil in a pot, and I put the chicken in the oil to cook it. Now I am chopping up garlic very finely, and I get 2 onions, and I am cutting them about 1/4 inch thick. Now after the chicken is all cooked, I take it out of the oil and I put it on the plate and I drain the oil. Now I'm putting the garlic and onions in the pot along with some tomato paste. And after stirring all that together, I add the chicken stock along with salt and pepper. I mix that all together, and now I'm adding my spices like paprika, cayenne pepper, scraping the bottom to make it clean and not have any burnt, crispy parts from the chicken in the pot. After stirring it all together, I taste it. It's really, really good. I add the chicken back and make sure that there's some sticking up. And after that, I let it sit for about an hour. Here's what the chicken paprikash looks like after adding the sour cream, and it is all done and ready to be eaten. The second wave of Hungarian immigration took place from 1890 to 1914. About 1.7 million Hungarians immigrated from Hungary around this time, most of which being poor and uneducated. They mostly settled in industrialized areas because most of them worked in factories. My last dish was cherry cake. For this, I needed salt, sugar, oil, yogurt, flour, baking powder, 2 eggs, cinnamon, vanilla extract, and cherries. First I put flour, baking powder, and salt in a bowl and mix it together. Then I cracked 2 eggs, put them in a bowl along with sugar and yogurt. Next I add in the oil and the vanilla, and then mix it in with all the dry ingredients. Then I put it into a greased baking sheet, evenly spacing out cherries on top. Then I sprinkle on some cinnamon. I let it bake for about 50 minutes and it came out really good. Bridgeport, Connecticut had the biggest Hungarian population in America as of 1915. At this point, about 10% of all people in Bridgeport were Hungarian. Fairfield and Bridgeport still have huge Hungarian populations today. The Kings Highway area in Fairfield has one of the biggest Hungarian communities in Connecticut. There's a Hungarian market and 2 Hungarian churches all pretty close together.
Well, what was your motivation to research and cook?
My motivation to research and cook was my Hungarian background. I really like to cook Hungarian food, and I really like eating Hungarian food, so I thought it would be a perfect project.
You concentrate on immigration, military food, economic class differences, or something else?
I focused on food that immigrants ate.
Okay. What were some of your surprises when you researched ingredients, cooking directions, and kitchen tools?
I didn't really have many surprises. The Hungarians really use the same kitchen equipment that we do in America for like normal American food.
What were some fun experiences?
I really liked getting to cook with my dad. My dad is a chef. He learned to cook the same meals that I just cooked, so it was really great.
Yeah. What were some of the things you learned about the group you researched, the dishes you made, and about cooking in general?
I just learned that Hungarians use a lot of paprika when they cook. It's like a really good spice, and it makes their food taste different and unique, and it's really good.
Alrighty, so this is me making the apple pie. Apple pie was considered a luxury back then because it was a dessert and many people couldn't afford to make a whole other meal for their family, so it was mostly eaten by the wealthy. Firstly, I cored the apples, followed by peeling and then cutting them. Then after I poured all the apples, I mixed them into a bowl and stirred some sugar, nutmeg, and cinnamon into the bowl. After all of that, I added some lemon juice, which I thought was really interesting because normally you don't see that in recipes, and this recipe called for lemon juice. The only thing that I modified in the recipe was that I made a crumble on top of the apple pie because personally I think the crumble tastes better. The crumble consisted of brown sugar and butter. So after all that was done, I filled the pie crust, which I bought, with the apples and then put the crumble on top of it. And then I put the apple pie into the oven for 45 minutes, and this is the final product. The next dish that I made was the pepper pot soup. Pepper pot soup was known as the soup that won the war. It got this name because when George Washington led his men into Valley Forge in the cold, harsh winter, Washington asked the army baker to prepare a meal that would warm the soldiers and boost their morale. The baker took scraps of meat, spices, and vegetables, thus making the pepper pot soup. To make this, I finely chopped onions, bell peppers, celery, and leek, along with minced garlic, and threw them into a massive pot. Heated it up until the vegetables were wilted. Then I cut up assorted meats like ham, bacon, and ground beef, and put that into a pot and grounded the meat and waited until the meat was brown. Next up was the potatoes, turnip, carrot, and parsnip, which I finely chopped and peeled and added them into the pot as well. After all that, I added 4 cups of water along with the beef stock and added spices like thyme, marjoram, cloves, and red pepper flakes. Once all of that was in the pot, we let that cook for 2 hours. This dish was eaten mainly by the middle class, as most vegetables were accessible. I would imagine that back then the soup wasn't as complicated, but here's the final product. The extra and final dish that I made was meatloaf. Meatloaf was typically eaten in the lower to middle class, and the ingredients used were commonly used throughout. These can be purchased at local markets and farms. To start off, I heated olive oil in a pan over medium heat and cooked onions and celery until the onions were about translucent. Then I placed the pork, the veal, and the beef, along with the parsley, thyme, chives, eggs, milk, and salt and pepper into a large mixing bowl. I put the panko in a food processor, fitted with the steel blade, and processed until the panko was finely ground. I then added the onion mixture and the panko into the meat mixture, and with clean hands gently tossed the meat mixture, making sure it was combined and not compact. I placed a piece of parchment paper on a sheet pan, pat the meat into a flat rectangle, and pressed the sides until it formed a cylinder down the middle. I then baked it for 40 to 45 minutes at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. And this was the final product.
Food during the American Revolution. I chose this project because I wanted to see what kind of foods were made hundreds of years ago and if they still held up today. I made 4 dishes throughout this project that reflected the times, the first of which was pumpkin gnocchi. Something I found out while making this project was pasta was actually very popular back then. Pumpkins were also a staple used in most dishes. Even though the recipe I used asked for canned pumpkin, I decided to use a whole pumpkin because I thought it would better emulate the times. I cut 1 whole pumpkin, gutted it, peeled it, chopped it up into pieces, and then crushed it into a paste. In a separate bowl, I mixed together 1.5 cups of flour, 1/4 teaspoon of salt and pepper, 1/8 teaspoon of nutmeg, 4 sage leaves, and a clove of garlic. I then mixed the pumpkin with that mixture and eventually it became a dough. I then rolled out pieces of the dough on a fork to make the pasta shape, and once it was boiled, it turned into gnocchi. The taste was good, but it was a little bland, so I added a sauce that I made using butter and ricotta just for flavor. The second food that I prepared was cornbread. While pasta was a food most enjoyed by wealthier colonists, cornbread was a very common food made by farmers all across the U.S. This recipe that I found comes from the oldest cornbread recipe found in the United States. It was made by Amelia Simmons in 1796. The recipe starts with pouring 1 cup of milk into a saucepan to scald. I then added 3 tablespoons of butter and 1 tablespoon of molasses into the milk. After the butter has melted, I pour all of it into a mixing bowl filled with 3 cups of cornmeal and a 1/2 cup of flour. After it's all mixed together, it is put into a pan and into the oven, which is heated to 375 degrees. This only took 30 minutes to bake and is a very simple and easy task to cook, which is why it was also called a common loaf. To be honest, this was definitely the worst outcome of the project. It was very dry and coarse and didn't really have any flavor. Next, there was pepper pot soup, which was also known as the soup that won the war. Supposedly, during the Revolutionary War, U.S. troops were facing a harsh winter camping in Valley Forge. George Washington told Army Baker General Christopher Ludwig to come up with a soup to feed the soldiers. He gathered a large variety of ingredients from the area, such as tripe and other meats, as well as numerous different vegetables, especially peppers. He put it into a giant pot, and it was a big success among the soldiers. Since then, December 29th has been declared Pepper Pot Day in honor of the food that kept the soldiers fighting in the winter. Unfortunately, the tripe was extremely hard to find, and eventually I had to accept that I couldn't put it in the recipe. Instead, I used veal to go along with the beef, which was a part of the given recipe. I cut up the meats, mixed them with salt, and let them slowly cook as I prepared the rest of the soup. I cut up 1 onion, 2 peppers, 4 cloves of garlic, 2 cups of potatoes, carrots, celery, and leek for the stew. I then added 2 cups of beef stock and a cup of water, as well as a whole onion which would sit in the stew while it cooked. Once the meats were fully cooked, I put them in the stew, and after 20 minutes on the stove set to high, the pepper pot stew was done. Originally, I was going to make blood pudding because blood pudding was actually a common food eaten in the colonies. But after spending 3 hours going to every butcher shop I could find in search of pig's blood, I found out that pig's blood was actually banned in the United States about a couple years ago. Lastly is the all-American apple pie. I found an old recipe for this and it hasn't really changed over time. I cut up 2 pounds of apples and mixed it in a bowl with 3/4 cup of brown white sugar, 3/4 teaspoon of cinnamon as well as nutmeg and salt, and 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. I put it all on a pie crust and then used the dough from the second pie crust to try to make a top for it, which kind of failed horribly, but I bet back then apple pies weren't the prettiest things either. After putting it in the oven for 2 hours, it was a great success. Multiple choice. What type of soup was so crucial to the American Revolution that it was also known as the soup that won the war? A. Chicken noodle soup. B. French onion soup. C. Pepper pot soup. Or D. New England clam chowder. The answer is C. Pepper pot soup. True or false? Blood pudding was a common dish at the time of the American Revolution, but now it is illegal to serve in the United States. The answer is true. Fill in the blank. What was the name of the woman who wrote the first documented recipe for cornbread in 1796? The answer is Amelia Simmons.
This eggnog recipe was introduced in 1839 and was a very popular drink for the wealthier classes during the holidays. This beverage became easy to produce as farms in the colonies grew that produced eggs and a cheaper rum. I substituted the rum for brandy, and the rest of the ingredients were eggs, milk, powdered sugar, and nutmeg. Rice pudding was a very common dessert that pretty much anybody of any class could afford and cook themselves. It consisted of these 8 ingredients, which were rice, sugar, butter, nutmeg, eggs, milk, vanilla extract, and raisins. All the ingredients are mixed well, put into a casserole dish, and then baked for about an hour. This bread recipe came from Martha Washington and was a relatively simple process. It only consisted of beer, milk, yeast, flour, salt, and I added some cinnamon. Bread was one of the most common pastries, and it became even more common after packaged yeast was introduced. Bread was considered a stable meal back then, and all the baking for the week was done in a single day. For the entree, I made fried chicken. The ingredients were flour, oregano, paprika, oil, chicken strips, garlic, salt, and pepper. I fried the chicken instead of deep frying and baking the chicken for time saving and because I didn't have a fryer. Chicken was a very common meat choice during the 1800s because of its efficiency to produce and cheap costs, which allowed the upper, middle, and some parts of the poor classes to cook.
To make pretzels, I mix dry and wet ingredients to form a dough. Roll them into strips, dunk them in a baking soda bath, score, and pop into the oven. The recipe for pretzels calls for flour, salt, sugar, water, yeast, butter, and baking soda. I was able to keep the recipe mostly the same when bringing it to life. However, I did not use the original butter. Instead, I substituted that for margarine, which is a vegetable alternative, because I can't have dairy products. In addition, towards the end of the recipe, it calls for coarse salt for sprinkling. However, I chose not to sprinkle salt at the end because I didn't want my pretzels to be too salty. Instead, I prefer them bland. The recipe also calls for the pretzels to be slightly thinner, rolling the dough strips into strips of 20 inches. However, I prefer my pretzels soft and squishy, so I chose to roll strips of 12 inches each in order to preserve the sacred thickness. During the time period, people would gather water from wells and boil over an open fire to kill the bacteria. There were no professional filtration systems at the time and no gas or electric burners. Preparations for food were much more labor-intensive. Sugar would be imported from sugarcane plantations in the south. Butter would commonly be churned by families, or they would buy from a local seller. Families would also grind locally grown wheat into flour themselves or buy from local sellers. Because this recipe does not call for many ingredients, it would be a cheap dish to make. To preserve these goods, you could put a cloth over the pretzels to prevent them from stiffening. However, the butter would be kept in the cellar where it is cool. At the time, pretzels would be cooked in a stone oven with a real fire. Meanwhile, I cooked them using a modern oven. I also kneaded the dough by hand, just like the people back then. To make sauerkraut, I chopped some cabbage, massaged salt and caraway seeds into it for 15 minutes, and packed it in a jar to be eaten after at least 3 days of fermentation. The recipe for sauerkraut calls for salt, a head of cabbage, and caraway seeds. Because I did not want to have a whole supply of sauerkraut laying around, I only used a quarter of the recipe, which in my opinion was still a lot. For sauerkraut, you could store it in a cool place for as long as you wish, because the longer it fermented, the tastier it became. The recipe said around 2 months was the expiration limit. However, as long as the sauerkraut did not smell or look bad, you could eat it for as long as you wish. People would store it in the cellar again where it's cool. It's important to keep it cool because if you store the sauerkraut warmly, there is the risk of the bad bacteria growing more quickly. In the directions, it asked to cover the jar with a cloth. However, I was worried about particles falling into the jar, so instead I loosely screwed the jar lid on, still allowing airflow. At the time, people would farm their own cabbage or buy from a local seller. Salt would be imported from brine fields along the coast. This dish would also be considered cheap because of its minimal ingredients. Caraway seeds originated in Europe and Asia, however, they were then farmed in North America. The recipe for Cristolyn calls for many ingredients such as milk, yeast, sugar, flour, egg, butter, lemon, vanilla extract, salt, cardamom, nutmeg, cinnamon, marzipan or almond paste, raisins, orange, almonds, dark rum, and powdered sugar. This recipe had the most alterations because of all the animal products. For example, the milk, butter, and eggs had to be changed. Instead of whole milk, I used almond milk instead of eggs. I used a special type of mung bean formula that comes in a bottle. For butter, I substituted margarine. This was my father's favorite dish because he said it tasted really nice. Instead of using candied orange and lemon peels, I chose to make it healthier by using lemon zest instead. I did not have orange like the recipe called for, so instead I used tangerine zest, which had the same citrus taste and smell. Because the recipe called for so many ingredients, I decided to also cut the recipe in half. Implementing the marzipan was optional, so we also chose to leave it out of the cooking for today. Cristolyns were preserved by keeping a cloth on top to keep the bread soft. Because these dishes were so delicious and special for the Christmas season, they were typically consumed fast and straight out of the oven while still warm. Butter and milk would come from a local cow, and butter would be churned again by local people. Eggs would come from family-owned hens or a local seller. Imported spices would also be very expensive because many of them grew in the South. For example, sugar, cinnamon, and vanilla were commonly imported from the West Indies, also known as the Caribbean. To make this dish would be very expensive, which also explains why families only ate it once a year. The word Christ in Cristolyn is there because the bread represents the body of Christ. I would now love to introduce Leona's segment, and SpongeBob connects to this project because the creator, Stefan Hillenburg, is of German descent.
Hello everyone, this is Brandon Maturi and welcome to the French Food Gallery. For my first dish, I will be making ratatouille. First, I will need to freshly dice some green peppers. This will be used to garnish onto my ratatouille. Next, I will be cutting up some fresh eggplant for the main part of my ratatouille. I need to cut them into thin slices because if I don't, then it won't cook right. Then I set it aside onto a little tray. Then I thinly slice some zucchini to add with my eggplant. Then I set that aside. Then I finally chopped up some white onions. These are going to be used in my sauce to give it that tangy, sweet taste that everyone likes. Then I set these aside. Then lastly, I diced up some red peppers. These were also going to act like the green peppers that I chopped up previously to add as a garnish on top of my ratatouille. Then I set these aside. In a small bowl, I mixed together a 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes, my freshly cut onions, some fresh herbs, and salt and pepper to taste. This sauce was going to be the base of my ratatouille. In a small pan, I cook my sauce for my ratatouille on medium heat for at least 10 minutes. I take my eggplant and zucchini and start to create a circular pattern around the pan, and also garnishing with my green and red peppers until it looks something like this. Then I take my sauce and evenly spread it around the ratatouille so I get an even bite. Then I place it in the oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 40 minutes covered with tin foil. After taking it out of the oven, it looked just like this. It was very tasty, and all my family said they loved it, and they said I should make it again. For my second dish, I will be making garlic butter. For this, I will need to peel a whole garlic. Then I'll need to cut the tip. Then I'll need to lightly drizzle with olive oil. Then I'll need to cover it in aluminum foil and preheat the oven to 350 for 45 minutes. To add to my garlic butter, I chop up some fresh parsley and then I place that in the bowl along with the garlic clove that has been in the oven for 45 minutes. I squeeze all the garlic out of it, use as much as I can. Then I pour my olive oil in and mix. Then I leave at room temperature for 20 minutes. This is the final product of my garlic bread. My family said it was the best garlic bread they'd ever tasted, so I felt like I did a pretty good job. For my next dish, we make crepes. We mixed egg, milk, and flour together, and it was very annoying because it kept sticking to the whisk. Next, we mixed some water, melted butter, until it became a soft consistency like this. Then take your crepes and place them on a hot pan with light oil. Once ready, place on a plate, and then you can start to decorate your crepe. And then fold it like this, and your crepe is complete. Look at that fine masterpiece. For my final dish, I will be making an apple tart. In a food processor, I will combine the dry ingredients, flour, sugar, and salt. Then I will add my 2 sticks of butter and cut them into half-inch pieces to create a soft, doughy mixture. Then I lightly cover my workspace in flour, and then I slap that bad boy onto the counter and start to knead it until I get a nice, soft consistency throughout the dough. Then I flatten out my dough a little bit. Then I use my roller and roll across with it to make a circle that is at least 12 inches in diameter. As I start to use my roller, I put more flour on my dough so my roll doesn't stick. Once I'm done flattening out my dough, I take parchment paper in a pan and I place it on the pan and put it in the fridge to rest for 15 minutes. While my dough is resting in the fridge, I have to peel and core 3 apples. In order for my apples to be placed onto my dough, I need to first cover it the whole thing in flour first. Make sure everything is coated and no spots are left behind. Then I take my sugar-covered apples and place them in a circular shape overlapping onto my dough to form a nice circle. Then I start to overlap my dough so I can only see the circle of apples in the center. And for taste and pleasure, I sprinkle some of my turbinado sauce onto my dough. When I take it out of the oven, all I see is a nice crispy apple tart that my family and I enjoyed.